So, guys, I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and unfortunately, I have no desire to play hooky from work tonight and actually go to the Ring of Honor Death Before Dishonor show. And the reason is that they don't have a lot of good matches tonight, and all the matches are predictable, really. And I do feel that it's really unfortunate that AEW does not care about Ring of Honor as much as it should, really. Like, honestly, Ring of Honor in the beginning was almost like an NXT where it's almost like you have some Ring of Honor veterans and you bring them over to AEW. And then you have people like Kyle Fletcher, Mark Briscoe, who went over to the main roster, and now you're doing that with Athena. But now it almost feels like it's the TNA wrestling of AEW because when I look at Bound for Glory this year, like I said, it should be Leon Slater versus AJ Styles. It should be, Mike Santana versus Trick Williams or Mike Santana versus AJ Styles for the heavyweight championship. You could have even done something like I said, Shark Boy versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, or do a segment with them really, or or James Storm and Robert Roode, challenging a TNA team, because we never said our goodbyes to them, you know, there's or like you do Abyss, versus like Bronson Reed, or Abyss versus a big monster guy on the AW on the TNA roster, really. Like ultimately, like it's like what I'm trying to say with Supercar Honor. They both have these issues of treating the shows more seriously, treating them like must see and whatever. And I understand they got it right with the Texas show where they were like, okay, if you pay extra money, you go to Supercar Honor for free, but we're gonna stack the card and we're gonna make it must see television. Really, like ultimately, why are they not doing this for Philadelphia? Because they don't have that many good matches. A lot of the matches are predictable, and I also feel that there's no sense of anything that has a lot of hype. Really, I want to go over the match card. That first of all, you're having two tag team matches. Like the first one is Sammy Guevara versus to be announced against the Outrunner. So it's almost babyface against babyface. They say those are not really good matches. And then the other issue is that again that Dustin and Sammy, they didn't have a lot of title defenses with some of their tag team titles. So it's almost like they're close to having the record of the longest. I think they have the record as the longest tag team title reign in Ring of Honor, really. So that does say something on where they're kind of racing old records, but they're not defending it that much, really. And then again, like Sammy Guevara, you've not really built him up over the years, really, as this kind of underdog wrestler, because he's wrestling two matches tonight. I think he should be like an underdog. Like this means a lot. I'm taking this shit seriously, but we're not seeing that dynamic really. So again, I don't really care about that match, and whoever wins, the Outrunner should not win. It should go with Sammy and somebody else, really, and they should kind of build something out of that. That's probably the best option, really. I think if you had members of the Don Callis family, like Josh Alexander and Wardlow or somebody else, really, a real threat and a real villain, I think you've gotten something stronger. Or even if it's like Ricochet and one of the members of the Gates of Agony, really, I think if you had a heel, face for a heel, that would work, really. The other thing is that you have Paul Walter versus QT Marshall. Like, who the fuck are these people? Like, QT Marshall, I know he's been wrestling on the roster, but isn't he a comedy wrestler? Because he's been wrestling the Costco Boys back to back, really. So, do I really care about them having a hardcore match? Because Paul Walter, you've not even established who he is. You've not even done any promos on Dynamite or Collision to say, or even on at Forbidden Door to say, hey, check out our Death Before Dishonor show. Let's talk about who Paul Walter is. Maybe we'll do a segment for Forbidden Door and be like, hey, we're gonna bring him to London. We're gonna talk about who he is. We're gonna show some stuff so everybody knows who the fuck he is, really. So that's also another issue, is that when you have matches, you have to establish who these people are to the audience, and you have to kind of get them familiar with it and be like, okay, this is a legitimate threat. So when these two people are fighting, a majority of people know what the fuck is going on, really, and who these people are. It feels like playing Marvel versus Capcom with a random character, So this doesn't work out well. And then also, if you're gonna have QT Marshall fuck around with the Costco guys, then why should I be invested in a match? Really, it's almost like having Santino Marella have a match at Bound for Glory against maybe some dark match wrestler or somebody from AAA. Really, it makes no sense really because if you're going to associate QT Marshall with Costco guys and cookies and comedy and losing to a guy who has been retired for a long time, really, why should I care that he's having a match with a guy named Paul Walter? Like, the only thing that's appealing by Paul Walter is that it makes me think of the name Paul White, Big Show. And then you have Athena versus Mina Shirakawa. Athena's almost at 1,000 days. Do you really think that they're going to take the title off of her? And then also, too, they might do something where they might have Athena attack Mina or almost, and then have Toni Storm, save her friend, really. And then also Toni Storm does licentious comedy, really. So if you have Toni Storm in her corner, you know that they're going to ham up the moment, or they're going to do the thing where they shake their boobies and everything like that. And while that'll make me really happy, no shit Sherlock, to see some booby shaking, you're going to take a serious moment and make it kind of stupid and comical, really, And then you also, Athena's going to retain at all costs, be a 1,000-day champion. She's so close to it. It's going to be predictable, really. And then if you have Mina win, it makes no sense because it's almost like she does comedy and she does comedy and silly stuff. So it's almost like, do you want that to be the person replacing your 1,000-day champion? I don't think so. The next match is Shane Taylor Promotions versus the Von Erichs and Sammy. So this is bad because the Von Erichs and Sammy, the Sons of Texas, the Von Erichs and Dustin, they had a match with Shane Taylor Promotions in Texas, and the last match that they had for the titles was over a year ago at Death Before Dishonor when they were in Texas, really. So they went from defending their titles and in over a year, one time in a year-long period, to now they're defending it, after 2 months, really, after roughly about 2 months. So I'm not really invested in this match because it's almost like, it does feel like nepotism or whatever, really. If you're going to be a champion, but you're going to defend your title like once a year, really, I don't really care about that match. And the Von Erichs, they should have been on multiple shows. You should establish who they are, really. If they're under contract with another company and they can't appear on your own television, you should not be giving them a champion or having them hold a championship for way over a year, really, with no defenses. It's a bad look. It reeks of nepotism. And that's a bad look for Dustin because that's saying, oh, well, backstage politics and whatever. The last match that they have is Lee Moriarty versus Zalhula and I believe he's from CMLL. So once again, that's not a good match because it's almost like, who the fuck is Zalhula? I can't even say his name right. Zalhula. Sounds like hula hula. Like, is his name Zalhula or Zalhula Hula Hoop or something like that, really? Again, you don't establish who the fuck he is, really. It's different when you go to Mexico Arena and people expect some unpredictability, but it's almost like, who the fuck is this guy, And Lee Moriarty, you haven't really established him or made him a threat, really. Tiger style, what the fuck is that? What does he do? Does he do doggy style in the bedroom with a tiger mask or something like that? I don't get it. But ultimately, it just shows that they don't really care about, they just don't really care about Ring of Honor, really. And there's so many things that they can do. Like, imagine if you had fucking Dalton Castle, who fucking rules, really. Imagine if you had somebody like Anthony Bowens on Ring of Honor and he wants to have a couple of matches, or he says something like, he's going to challenge Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho is the Ring of Honor champion, so he wants to challenge a former Ring of Honor champion. I mean, I have a fantasy booking of Chris Jericho versus Anthony Bowens because Chris Jericho's going to lead the company, really. So what would happen if we set up a storyline this week of Chris Jericho versus Anthony Bowens? Anthony Bowens wants to lead the company. Anthony Bowens wants Jericho to lead the company. Anthony Bowens wants to challenge Chris Jericho, get a pinfall before Jericho leads the company to establish himself. So what would happen if you gave Anthony Bowens a match in this card and said he's going to face a former Ring of Honor champion like maybe Dalton Castle or Samoa Joe or Jay Lethal or somebody else, really. Like, I think that would be a good move. What would happen if you have Max Caster join Ring of Honor and do an open challenge? Because I think he should be on Ring of Honor and do some raps and you had him against Massacre Dorado or another like wrestler that people want to see really. What would happen? And there's no if you have more women on this roster, like I think Red Velvet and she challenged, maybe Tekla or maybe or like you have like a babyface facer like Thunder Rosa, and then Tekla and somebody else messed that up, and this leads to the steel cage match or whatever. It leads to blood and guts really. Like there's always like so many like tie-ins that they can do really. So I think like them not caring about Supercard of Honor is a bad thing, and I think like the sad thing about it is that they had thousands of people go to Ring of Honor shows in the early years of AEW, but now it's like as I said that I think that it's just like their TNA wrestling. They have it, but they have it and they're happy to have it, but they don't know really how to make it as profitable as they can really. And there's still like time to do that, and they almost got a television contract. It's ultimately like I said, it's really a neglected garden really. It's really just like neglected seeds. They just have to they can make something out of it, but they're not, and that's really just not that good really. And it's not going to be easy fix. It's not going to be Chris Jericho being a fucking putz with the world heavyweight title and being the king of New York and wearing a stupid ass like Statue of Liberty crown and expecting the audience to do that and be in on a stupid comedy. It has to be a lot of people putting in work. What if Bro Dito said, you know what, we're going to defend the tag team titles on the show really against a Ring of Honor team, and they do that, and then at the end of the night you have him. He opens the show with that, and then at the end of the night he ends the show with a match against Hachishiro. I think that would be kind of cool, really. Like I said, there has to be so many tie-ins. What would happen if Mark Briscoe says, I have some words about MJF. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to challenge him to a match, Like I said, and what would happen if you had some people on this roster say, "Hey, we're gonna be on the dark match of All Out," or "Hey, we're gonna add some match to that show, really," or what if this is where Mark Briscoe announces his match, or Kyle Fletcher says, "I'm gonna face somebody on this roster for the TNT Championship," So it's like what I said that they can utilize Supercard, Death Before Dishonor so well to build up so much other shit. Really, they could also do a lot of. They should have done a lot of promotions at like London '02. They should have announced the show. They should have announced the card. They should have had, a couple of interviews really with people, and be like, hey, you know what? Don't just check this out. You have like a Mexican wrestler in Zahua. Why don't you say, okay, well, wouldn't it be feel more Forbidden Door to kind of announce him, introduce him, say, check out this guy this weekend, this Friday at Supercard of Honor? What would happen if you had some UK wrestlers or Rev Pro wrestlers who want to join AEW and they join AEW and say, hey, we're gonna have some matches on the show, really check it out, really. The London crowd goes crazy for them. Or what would happen if you announced the match card and announce other things, and you kind of set up a promo for for the wrestling event, and you put that on Forbidden Door, so you have some of that audience watch Supercard of Honor really, and you say something like, hey, this is the price of the show really. I'm not sure how much it costs to watch it, but I'm not sure how much it costs to watch it really, but it probably does cost something, maybe like $10. I'm not sure if it's like $50, $60. But it's just really unfortunate that, like I said, there's so much that they can do with Ring of Honor to make it a really, really big fucking deal, and they don't do it really. It's really is their TNA wrestling, where it seems like, it's a project that they have that they're funding really, but ultimately it's a way for them not to give Ring of Honor to WWE and keep that library really. But there has to be a point where, you can be you're making some money with it, but you wouldn't be making way more money with it. It should be like their NXT, but they're not treating it as such really, and that's unfortunate. So you have these pay-per-views. Like I said, and I'll say it again, like last year, they had a Ring of Honor show, and they attracted more than 1,000 people at the Leah Kurus Center. Now they're at a 900-seat arena, and they're probably going to be like 700 people really, or something like that, So it says something like honestly, they have to get their shit together with Ring of Honor. Like there's so much talent, there's so much potential, there's so much paychecks that they're giving out really. There's so many people on that roster like Shane Taylor, who goes the fuck about being a professional wrestler. There's so many people like Mark Briscoe and Kyle Fletcher who benefited from that. So, just start giving a fuck about Ring of Honor and just build it towards something AEW. This show just shows they don't care about Ring of Honor, and they're going to be in that cycle of not doing the best that they can with this when they should be doing that.